Hello, everyone. Welcome to another video about getting a job in offensive security. In the last few discussions, we've talked about working in the security industry, some of the things that hiring departments and whatnot look for. This video is a third part we're doing with Droogie, who is still on with us as well as with his cat, talking about what types of jobs are out there and the typical interview process. So I'll let you jump off, Z, with the interview or sorry, with the types of jobs that are out there because I know you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mostly just want to put a little bit of focus in when you're first applying for a job in like the security industry on the offensive side. You do have options on where you can work. You can, so Drugi and I have both mentioned working at a consultancy, and we've already talked about kind of the pros and cons of that. You can work at like a part of an internal team at a company. You'll see a lot of postings for that, and I feel like a lot of people go and apply to those internal jobs, or you can join on with a research team. Um, I'd argue the consultancy is kind of the easiest place to get your foot in the door. The consultancy is just looking for basically manpower, people to join their team. Oftentimes they're not, they might have, a funding limit on how many people they can have, but generally speaking, they're just hiring for the team. They don't have like a specific slot to fill. So they're more able to take a bit of a risk where it seems like maybe you're a little bit more junior than they'd want, but you'll learn quickly. They can maybe hire you on that. They recognize that people are self-taught, have a variety of backgrounds, and don't necessarily come out of any sort of traditional background. So they can kind of take that risk a little bit more than an internal team, where a lot of the postings you're going to find are these internal teams, and they're hiring like all the candidates apply. They're trying to fill like one or two slots or something like that. So they filter aggressively. If you don't have a background already, if you don't have formal qualifications or whatnot, you're more likely to just kind of get filtered out of that. And then the research teams are generally a lot more experienced individuals. They usually a lot more folks or attached to a university is kind of the other option, but it tends to be a lot more of just a networking approach where it's just, at least my experience, any offer I've had with a research team has literally just been because I've known somebody and was talking with them about my interest there, and not so much about actually applying to it.
Something I kind of wanted you to expand on was I'm pretty sure it's you in the past who have said if you have the experience, you want to try to avoid the junior position listings just because of how much more competitive those positions are, right? So I didn't
Well,
know if you wanted to expand on that a bit.
internships, junior positions, there are just not very many of them. And internships are really, my experience has been they're very competitive numbers wise. If you have the experience, like I tend to describe the whole offensive security industry as being, rather than, we don't really have an entry level, but it is a direct entry. You don't have to do like the help desk grind and go up as like help desk sysadmin and up there. Like that is a valid path, or you don't have to start off as a dev and make your way in. It is largely, if you've got the skill to do the job, you're going to be able to get an interview, especially at one of these consultant type companies where they're just hiring people who have skill. They're not so much focused on your qualifications. So at least that's been my experience, is if you've got that skill, don't worry about being like, don't go and apply for like a senior position or something. But a lot of times, like there's a very flat structure in a lot of cases, just like your general consultant, maybe specific like web app consultant, mobile, like some specification there, senior, principal, stuff like that. It's not highly leveled. I don't know, Droog, if you've had a similar experience on that.
Yeah, no, I've tend to suggest to people that getting their foot in the door at a consultancy is simply just trying to garnish enough skills or experience for one of the services they offer. So you can try to sell to them, even if you're not as experienced and you're still relatively junior, that you can still, pick up and learn quick. But the idea is, since it is a consultancy, they only make money if they're able to bill you out, or else you're a cost. And so if you already have skills working towards a service they offer, such as web app pen testing, if you've been actively working through Portswigger Academy stuff and you can speak about OWASP top 10 comfortably, you should be able to find a easy spot into a web app pen testing position. And then once your foot is now in the door, you can start working on those other skills.
Yeah, so I guess moving on from that though, in terms of how you actually got into the industry, I've already mentioned I had a bit of a weird background starting off as a magician, worked as a dev. I wasn't really looking to move into security. I had a very different career plan at the time. In my case, I basically just went on Reddit. NetSec had their hiring thread. I was just looking for some challenges to do. I was just a little bit bored, so I just went there, did like Control F challenge, and worked on one of the challenges that a company had on there. And then I'm like, hey, I'm not quite too sure how to progress here. Sent him an email because I was unclear about where to go, and they just asked me to interview, and there I went. Droogie, I think you had more of a networking experience on that for your first job.
Yeah, so I worked just kind of normal jobs like grocery store, movie theater type stuff. And I had interest in computers and security, and a lot of that came from video game stuff. Being interested, and started learning about like patching and cracking games and writing trainers, and then kind of stumbling into like challenge sites like hack this site and um, various war games. I kind of dabbled with those throughout high school for fun, and maybe even like a little bit like eighth grade. And eventually, I networked with a lot of people on IRC. I knew people who were doing security work, but it was always that thing at the time where in my head I was like, oh, that'd be amazing to do one day, but I never actually thought it would happen. And it wasn't until I was actively working on, just like war game stuff and web challenges or whatever. And a buddy of mine was like, "Why don't you ever just apply and do this for work?" And I always went to DEF CON. I grew up in Vegas, so that was easy. And I ended up meeting with my buddy, and he introduced me to some of his coworkers, and it was kind of like this weird on the spot interview type thing. And it eventually led to them giving me a job offer, and a lot of that had to do with like luck and timing because they had a staff aug for a web app focus thing going on, so they needed somebody to focus on web stuff, and them being fairly junior was okay. So it was good timing in that regard. And I honestly think that the only way I got the foot in the door was just simply through knowing the people and networking. Because if I just went out and was applying and just had the stuff on my resume, I don't think I would have gotten a call back.
Yeah, I mean, networking is, kind of said before, it's kind of a smaller industry. I mean, it's not that everybody knows everybody, but most people are quite accessible. And you'll just find people randomly hanging out. So, I mean, we met through the Save MGO project, just both of us kind of working on reverse engineering that. Just kind of run into people as you do projects you're interested in. So just hanging out and actually being part of the general security community, I think really helps in giving you access to people. And you'll run into people in some of the strangest places too. I've always still been surprised by some of the people I've just run into. I like Mario Maker. And just in some of the chats there, just running into some fairly well-known people.
Yeah, same with like speed running.
Yeah, speedrunning too. Just you'll run into people there, but just being around, being part of communities and getting to know people gives you those connections, using that networking. I mean, everybody's online.
And I think like networking is highly underrated, and I think conferences are a great place to do that. Especially with something like DEF CON, there is the line con event where, when you initially go there, you're just standing in a line waiting for the ticket desk to open to get your badges and stuff. And in those lines, it's you just meet people and you just talk. You talk about what you do, what they do, and it's so easy to spark conversations, especially at places like conferences where there is that in-person interaction. It makes it so much easier to kind of ramble on and talk about what you're passionate about and stuff. And you never know who you'll find in those lines. They could be working for a company that they know is looking for people, or you could be talking to, somebody who's looking to start up a company. Like there's so many different possibilities that you can encounter going to something like a conference, which is really unfortunate because it's yet another thing that's being impacted by this stupid virus, man, is we don't even know when we're going to get conferences again. DEF CON this year was virtual, CCC is virtual. We don't even know if next year's conferences are going to be happening in person, and that's really going to impact networking across the board, unfortunately. Um,
Yeah, I've really enjoyed actually like meeting people at parties, especially like the DEF
yeah,
CON parties. I've had more than a handful of interview offers just talking with somebody at a party. It's like, hey, I'm interested in doing this sort of work, getting into that. It's like, oh, I happen to do that work. We talk for a bit, pseudo interview, and it's like, carry on from there. Now, I haven't taken any of those jobs or any of those interview offers, unfortunately, but I've definitely had a good number just through like talking with people at those parties. I mean, networking, it's an industry that's, I think, reasonably accessible. And I think there's a lot of people who talk about how hard of an industry it is to break into because I think they need to do like the help desk grind that I mentioned before. And it's actually a lot more accessible if you just kind of put yourself out there.
just talk to people. Yeah,
Yeah, I think the parties is a great idea because most people are just kind of hanging out and just wanting to have, just low key conversations. And, sometimes technical content will kind of spark up and you're just very relaxed, right? And it just happens to work out. And same with just line con or just meeting people at conferences. Like that introduction just kind of propagates. You go and you meet that one person that you met online, right? And you hang out with them for half a day. As you walk through the conference with them, you're going to then meet every single person, of every single friend of theirs that they walk by, and suddenly you just met 10 different people that do 10 different types of jobs at 10 different companies, and that's going to be way better than you just sending out your resume to a bunch of random places.
the exposure is exponential there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even like with networking, even if you don't get that like on the spot interview, like sometimes you could probably just bypass the interview process entirely with that like kind of on the spot, more chilled out interview scenario. But even if you don't, just getting that recommendation, especially to like the bigger companies where there's more people applying, it can get you like past the cues into the interview, right? You don't have to go through the maybe you skip some of the like pre-screening filters and stuff like that. And that's where I think we can kind of segue into talking about the interview process. So, if you like compared to some of the interviews I've had with real life jobs, starting out when I was younger, grocery store, stuff like that. It's just typically one interview with like the manager of the store or something, and then you pass or you fail. You get a call back or you don't. With tech interviews though, there is typically more layers from my experience. Usually there is like a pre-screen interview, and then if you get past that pre-screen interview, you're usually not just interviewing one person. You're sometimes in a circuit of like 4 to 5 people that you're interviewing with different teams and stuff like that. So I think we should probably talk about that because maybe somebody who hasn't gone through that interview process might not be aware of how involved it actually is. I know I wasn't. I was kind of blindsided a little bit by it. Um, and you kind of mentioned earlier, Z, as well, those take home challenges. Sometimes there is that initial barrier where they'll launch like a CTF site. And then if you solve the challenges or whatever, you can get that interview opportunity.
Yeah, and the take home challenges are I mean, they're not unique just to tech or just to security, but at least compared with, I think, the take home challenges I see with devs, I feel like the take home challenges in security are at least a lot more relevant to the work that we're actually kind of expected to do. And it it tends to be the way that if you don't have that formal experience, you haven't already worked the job, those take home challenges are kind of how you can establish yourself as, yeah, I actually know how to do this. And those take home challenges vary completely. Like, say, it could be like they'll pop up a web app. They might ask you to like write a dumb fuzzer for like a network thing, or I think some companies have like a crypto challenge in there. It might be a CTF. Right? Like, there's a ton of different ways it could be. But if you don't have a lot of experience, I'd say you probably want to prepare to have some sort of skill testing challenge that will take some of your own time. And we could debate the benefits of actually having those take homes, but I think I'd rather at least have the way for somebody that doesn't have the formal experience to still be given a shot to prove that they know what they're doing. And that's where take homes kind of come in. If you do have the experience, though, there's a fair chance that you'll just get to skip that anyhow. They don't want to waste a lot of time like testing. Oh, you've got like 20 years at this well-known company doing their web app security, so let's give you this take-home challenge, see if you can do a SQL injection. Like, that's just a waste of time.
Yeah,
Which is another spot where that networking can kind of help out there too. Is just bypassing those entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I agree and disagree a little bit. We have a take-home challenge that we'll give some people, and a lot of the time it's when they don't have uh, a lot of experience across the board of different categories, and I'll suggest, hey, why don't you give this to the person? And we're not expecting them to spend a week on it or something. Like if they want to, they can, or I guess, but it's not supposed to absorb your entire life. It's just to kind of give us an idea of what you're experienced with. Because if you're very experienced, across the board in these different areas, you should be able to knock it out quite fast. And sometimes I will actually see a person kind of push back and say, um, "Oh, I feel that I'm so experienced that I shouldn't have to bother taking that. I'm uninterested." And to me, that's just like a red flag, where it's just like, from my perspective, I feel that um, interviews themselves sometimes, especially if they get very trivia heavy, my mind will go blank. I'm nervous, and I'd 100% would rather have a take home where I could just show my practical skill set instead of trying to answer trivia.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess when I'm coming down on the take homes, they're generally like, you're not giving a take home that's going to, take 40 hours. Or at least if it does, you're probably spending a lot more time than you should on it.
Yeah, than is expected. Yeah.
But there is kind of that problem, especially on the developer side of interviews, where they'll give you like a take home challenge that's expected to take you like 8 hours, which is just a bit much. Like, implement Facebook on your own here and, send it over to us. So I feel like on the developer side, there's been a lot of pushback against take homes, but I do feel like it's a lot more relevant on the security side. Like, I haven't seen a lot of companies giving take homes that aren't relevant to the job. Whereas on the dev side, I've definitely seen take homes that really aren't that relevant. Like, some of the algorithmic things when you're, applying for a crud job. Things like that. So I feel like it is better on the security side, but I could kind of understand somebody just having that instinctual pushback against them.
Yeah, I guess it depends on, I guess, your experience. If you've done a ton of them, I don't have a lot of experience interviewing around and doing take homes, so I can really only speak on the one that I hand out to people. But generally, if somebody's telling me that they're an experienced, let's say for example, a web app pen tester, on the take home, there's going to be web stuff, there's going to be some crypto stuff, some reversing, some embedded. So I'll tell them, I don't expect you to answer all of these. I'd like to see you uh, do the ones that are in the wheelhouse that you're selling to me. In this case, it'd be web. And if you don't solve the challenge, I would still at least like to see your write up of your methodology, your approach, and your thought on what the issue might be. And we can discuss it. And if you like to spend more time and look at the other challenges, like please do, and give me any sort of thought process or write up, and we can go through the challenges. That's kind of how I've always approached it. It's never been go stress over this for the next X amount of time. It's just more of like, from the discussion, from what I've seen on your resume, there's not a lot of experience there, but you're saying that you have practical experience. Like, please show it to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I don't think that's necessarily too uncommon either. To use that kind of with everybody like that. Um, I- since you mentioned on the pushback initially, and I kind of followed on that, it does kind of touch on the pre-screen call. Usually, sometimes you'll have this take home before you ever talk with anybody. If it's just like public, some companies have these challenges just available for anybody to do. Some give it to you after you've applied. The pre-screen call, though, you're usually looking at those soft skills, and I think somebody pushing back really hard against that take home and like an arrogant and like I'm too good for this is definitely kind of a red flag. You already mentioned that as just red flag. It's not kind of the soft skills that you need, or it demonstrates that maybe you're lacking a little bit in that area.
Yeah, so in that scenario, I'm not part of the pre-screens, obviously, and what happened is they reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you please interview this person? Here's their resume." And the person's opening was like the interview was like almost 2 weeks away from when they asked. And I said, "Sure," and I glanced at the resume and I was just like, I'd like to see them do the CTF just to have an idea. They have like 2 weeks to work on it, just because I'm not very excited from just looking at the resume, right? So I'd like to really have something to discuss with them about in terms of these real skills. And they pushed back and said they didn't want to do it. And then I said, okay, sure, we'll just continue with the interview. And then a few days before the interview, then they canceled it. So
Yeah, so didn't even get to go forward on that.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that pre-screen though is a good chance to also kind of ask your own questions. I mentioned during a previous discussion there that I tend to ask about, what's the coolest phone you found. I've heard it was kind of a good question to ask back at them. I don't know if you've been asked that while you've been like when you've been interviewing somebody else.
No, I tend to always ask them if they have any questions for me about myself or the company, and I get a lot of people that say no, which is surprising. A lot of times, the other questions are more about culture and or just like travel. Like, how much am I going to have to travel? Like, how much do you really travel? Maybe once or twice somebody's asked about interesting work, but a lot of the times it's more about like culture and work life balance.
Well, the interesting work, like I asked that, it does kind of tell me a bit about the culture. How somebody responds to that tells me a little bit about how much they actually enjoy their work, if they're able to come up with something, or if it's like I haven't really done anything.
Yeah, that's great
It's
advice, because if you're asking somebody that and they kind of seem disinterested and they don't really have much to say and they've been at the company for years at that point, like that's a little concerning, right? Is that a place that you might want to avoid?
yeah.
I
So go ahead.
I think it's easy for people to forget that interviews aren't just to see if you're the right fit for the company, but also if the company is the right fit for you. So they shy away from asking those types of questions, which I think asking those types of questions, what the culture is like and what type of work you would be doing, and kind of like what Z asked with what's the most interesting thing you found or done while you work here, it kind of shows that you understand that how the interview process works, and that fact that it's kind of a two-way street of uh if it's a good fit for you and if you're a good fit for them.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, kind of being on the interview, I will say the interviews can get very technical. Now, this isn't the pre-screen anymore, um, but you can reach you can hit some very deep points during your technical interviews. Um, I don't know how your company's done them, but I do know some that we do is kind of focus on finding the boundaries of someone's knowledge. Like kind of asking those probing questions until they don't know or can't really go any further, and then seeing how they can reason from that point.
So the way I approach it, which might be different than the way my coworkers approach it, right? The way I've been doing it lately and I've had the most success out of is I'm not a fan of the trivia game. Um, Beyond asking some basic things, I don't like the heavy trivia stuff. Like, I've never dove like into like weird like comp sci type trivia or network trivia stuff on people. I will ask them some questions that I try to give them some wins early on because I want them to be comfortable. I usually start with asking them to tell me a little bit about themselves and what they're looking for and what excited them about this potential position and what they want out of it, and then based on what their experiences are, I try to dive into the areas that they're most comfortable with first. So I explain to them how it's consultancy and we offer various services. And so I explain how there's web and network and embedded and code reviews, etc. And for example, if they say web, I will start with questions that I think anybody should be able to answer if they're telling me that, in hopes of giving them a win. Like, what is cross-site scripting? But I don't really go beyond that. I tend to drive into scenarios. So I'll say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you a URL for a web application, and I'm going to give you um, three different sets of credentials. We have a low-level user credential, like a read-only type user, a regular user, and administrator user. And I am giving you 2 weeks to perform a pen test on this web application. Like, please go. And I expect them to kind of tell me their methodology and how they're going to approach this application, how they're going to map out the scope. And I'm looking for key things that they should have hopefully picked up on based on the scenarios I give them. Like, if they ask for more details, like for example, I specifically tell them multi-tiered authorization levels because I want to hear them say that they're going to try various privilege escalations between API endpoints and stuff along those lines. And then if they have network experience, then I try to pivot the scenario and I say, let's pretend you found a code execution vulnerability in that web app that you were pen testing. You now have a shell on this server. It is a Linux server, and you are a low-level service account. Go. I try to see how their brain thinks about how they're going to attempt to prevesc. And then I tell them, okay, you successfully prevest. What, like, your goal is to move throughout the network and find more details. Like, what are you looking for? I'm expecting them to, you know, point out how they're going to move forward, their methodology in general. And the reason I like to do it this way is because if they're able to answer it and they're comfortable answering it, it shows that they have experience there. And the areas that they're inexperienced on, they can ask for more details and we can walk through the scenarios. And if they're very experienced, you can just keep kind of digging lower and lower and lower, um, and go into detail. So that tends to be how I approach it. The only time I ever go into like a whiteboard-ish scenario is if they say like they like to do code review. I like to give them a snippet of some C code and have them walk me through it and find vulnerabilities.
Yeah, so when you talk about kind of giving the scenario, I think that's a pretty common setup. Maybe not that exact scenario, but needing to share kind of your methodology, what you test for, how you'd kind of go about, how you'd approach different situations, I think is fairly common. When you talk about the digging, when I first mentioned kind of probing in there and getting technical, I think I'd relay it with you saying how you would start digging into it. Not so much raising it as a trivia question, but digging into it, allowing the candidate to expand on their own knowledge, go as deep as they want to go. But still kind of,
Okay,
I
yeah.
mean, still related to that. Like, I'm also not a fan of trivia at all.
Like, I tend to just I base it based on what they tell me, right? Um, like one of my last interviews, like a guy mentioned, oh, I checked for SUID binaries to Privesc. I said, perfect. How would you do that? Like, how would you exploit it if there was a SUID binary? And then he couldn't answer that. And it's like, okay, so what does that tell me? It tells me that you're like kind of memorizing a list or something that of things that you should be checking for, or you're maybe reading something off to me, but you have never actually done it, right? That's kind of like where I dig into what they're saying and I focus it on what they're doing in terms of their scenario methodology, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I say, I think that's reasonably common too.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess when I say trivia, I mean like I don't start like saying, "Oh, what's the OSI like layer 3?" Like, like questions like that.
okay, so
I
honestly, if you were to ask me that, I would not get it. I think that's I want to. Yeah, I don't. I'm not even going to take a stab at it. I do not know the OSI layers. Like I know
I
what
don't.
some of
Yeah.
them are, but like you asked me what's OSI layer 3, I've got no idea. I'm pretty sure seven's application. So I want to
I don't
say,
know. I couldn't tell you.
yeah. I mean
That's kind of
that's
that's the point of that I made earlier, where you shouldn't be committing everything to memory, especially when there's things that you can simply reference,
yeah. I know how to
especially when they're
Google
not
that
relevant.
one.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
always
those are
felt
the
like.
things.
Go ahead.
Uh, I was gonna say there's other things like somebody like I've heard people ask this before where they say like, explain what happens when I make a web request or something, like a post request to a server, like what is happening, and they see how low the person will go, or what happens with a DNS query and stuff. But I tend to not really dive into that because um, especially if it's a someone on a more junior side or doing web related stuff, like them having those foundations down there committed to memory is not going to help them do their job better, in my opinion.
So I'll actually say one place I worked previously wasn't quite that question, but was kind of an open-ended question of that sort. Um, and I know they tended to use that. They weren't so worried about you getting all of the super low-level details. Um, like if you, they would expect you to mention things like DNS, for example. Like just mentioning you didn't have to memorize how DNS worked, but the expectation that you kind of understand that like a DNS query happens. Um, Actually, when I was interviewing, I forgot about DNS. They asked me, I was like, oh yeah, like got that. I ended up going fairly deep on some of the details because like I had just done like a bunch of operating system internal stuff, so I was able to do that. But I mean, what they're looking for though is hitting that boundary, not necessarily hitting like you've got to know all the low level details, just where do you go naturally, what are your interests, and kind of gaining that sort of insight rather than necessarily having the checklist of all the things that all the low level things that you need to know, like, oh, you're typing on the keys, so do you know about the hardware and like what happens when the key makes contact or things like that. Because I've seen there's a GitHub actually for that particular question about when he hit enter that actually goes into that hardware level stuff. But oh no, I do think
Yeah,
it's
that
a
stuff's
valid
not.
question.
I mean, they're valid, but I don't think they like if I asked that to somebody and they answered it, that does not tell me if they're able to do their job or not. That's kind of like why I go to the scenario routes, because in the end, after I interview somebody, I'm handing my notes off to my manager or whoever, and generally I have them categorized as based on the different services we offer. Do I think this person is billable and able to do this job, or do I think they're able to do it with support initially, and then eventually they'll be on their own, or do I think they're not ready at all? And I basically categorize it like that, and I never really say, yes, this is a hire, no, this is not a hire. I generally say, these are the areas where I feel that they would be able to offer these services to the company. And it's up to you guys if you need somebody to fill that role.
I think that's fair to say that doesn't really show if they're able to do the job, but it does show a little bit more on the soft skill, the ability to communicate the technical topics, which is still a valid skill. I mean, especially as consultants, I mean, you need to be able to communicate technical topics. So that kind of opens that discussion up to actually see how they do so.
Yeah, that's true.
And I know that's one of the things they'd be looking for with that question is, how well do you communicate? And that's something that anybody who's listening, you're probably going to be judged in some sense on your communication skills. Like it's an important skill to have because you are going to have some of these hard discussions with clients.
Yeah, no, you need to be able to be professional, and you're representing a company, and a lot of times you'll be on site speaking to higher ups at a customer of yours, and you need to be able to have those communication public speaking skills. And if you're going to struggle at that, then being a consultant would definitely be something that you should probably avoid, or try to find um, a company that is aware that you're not comfortable going on site and speaking, and maybe there's some sort of position for you. But that's a major part of it. It's a requirement, and I might get some slack for this, but generally when you're going on site somewhere, not all environments are the same. So you're expected to be professional, and you know, dress nice and look representable, and that just comes with the business, and the way it works, in my opinion. Like, I know people
I mean,
disagree
that's
with
part
me,
of being a
but
consultant
yeah,
is,
like if you have a purple mohawk, like, I'm sorry, like, I'm not going to recommend to send you on site. I'm like,
yeah, like, I mean, I agree and I disagree. Obviously I've worked mostly remote. I'd have, the occasional on site, and I don't have a purple mohawk or anything, just my big beard. But other than that, I can kind of agree with the concern over how somebody looks, especially as a professional. I do think like you still have to dress, that one of the rules I learned as a magician was you dress one level higher than your audience, or like one step above. So like if everybody else says business casual, you're wearing business. Things like that.
That's
And
a good rule of thumb, I think, just generally.
it
yeah,
also works for
I tend to
interviews.
do, yeah, I tend to do, I don't go that level. I tend to just, I've been in environments where there is no dress code, right? And in those environments, I still, do kind of business casual. I wear nice shoes, nice jeans, and some sort of button-up shirt, right? Um, and generally, that's kind of like the same that I apply to most environments. Because I definitely don't think you want to be like overdressed. Obviously, like showing up with a suit in an environment where they're extremely casual,
Yeah,
might be a bit jarring.
that's why I'm kind of specific. You do one step above rather
Yeah,
than because yeah, you don't want to be overdressed either. That is an important thing, but that's fine. The one step above just shows kind of the preparedness the professionalism without going like too far, in my opinion. At least that was the rule
Yeah.
I kind of learned, and I've kind of just worked with that. I haven't had any issues with it.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say as well, like I said, with a lot of these things, this is like my opinion and just like the way that I perceive it. It's not my employer's opinion, and they hire people all the time where it's on them, right? But it's just when I'm recommending somebody or I'm telling somebody advice for going out and getting a job, especially if it's consulting or something, that tends to be the advice that I'm handing out.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I do have a final question, which I know we're running a bit long, so I'll try to keep it relatively short. But yeah, this is something that I've kind of encountered in my personal experience, and I feel like might be a question that other people out there might be wondering too. Is should you be worried about companies or hiring teams looking primarily in like the background check phase, looking to see if you've had any drama around disclosure? Because in one interview that I had, I remember somebody pointed to one of my write-ups and asked me, was there a reason you didn't send this write-up to the vendor or report it to the vendor directly or something along those lines? In that case, I was fine. I mostly just pointed out that the issue was patched, so it was irrelevant. I didn't need to send it to the vendor; they already knew. So what I wrote about was already like publicly known or already known by the vendor information. So in that particular instance, I don't think my hireability was impacted negatively, but I think it's a reasonable question and something that people might want to be aware of for future job searching is it important to try to keep all of your bug reports or anything like that within the reasonable realm of responsible disclosure.
I mean,
Um,
it looks bad if you're going around dropping O days for, especially if it happens to also be a potential client.
yeah, exactly. Like it really just comes down to it's going to be case by case. Like, who are your customers? Are you going to potentially hire somebody that one of your major customers has beef with for some reason? Maybe that's not a concern, but maybe you just make sure you don't put them on that type of work. Uh, some of that is just for people doing public research, where they were publicly black box researching something, and then they happen to join on the team, and that's one of our customers now. Well, it's like we make sure that we don't put them on that work because it would be they want to continue their research, right? So if we put them on it, then it's no longer kosher because now they've seen internal stuff and NDA and whatnot. But I do think it's important for people to realize that, yeah, your online persona is going to likely be judged, and um, that doesn't just go with just bug write ups or things reported, but also just goes with just infosec drama, Twitterverse type stuff as well. Like the amount of things that I see people doing and saying and joining these like weird Twitter army cancel things is kind of jarring to me because I've always just thought like, why would somebody want to actively work with somebody when they see them doing that? But yeah, I would definitely try to minimize that stuff or keep that in mind, especially when you're applying for jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I'd basically just sum it up as, keep your nose clean. If you have the drama in your background, there is a chance it can cause problems if you can't, especially if you can't explain it away.
Yeah, because you have to remember too, maybe an internal team, it's not that big of a deal, but at a consultancy, like I've gone on site to customers and the person there starts asking me about a presentation I gave or something because they see my name and they know that I'm a contractor and they decide to research me. So, you don't necessarily want stuff that a customer is going to research and then, not like. So
Could
you got to
get
keep
really
that in
awkward,
mind.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've ran about 45 minutes, so I think we will wrap it up there. I would like to thank Droogie for coming on for these videos. These discussions go up on Thursdays at 8 a.m. We also have the podcast that you guys can check out if you find these discussion videos interesting. We have the podcast at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific live streamed, and those also go up on Tuesdays for the videos, usually at around 6 p.m. That being said, though, I think that pretty much wraps up our little mini series on getting a job in the security industry. I will leave a little bit of a space here if you guys have any final notes before we end off there.
The only thing I do want to add, I didn't find a place to put this in during the actual discussion, unfortunately, but there was one book that I read that was actually required reading for me, which is the book called Trusted Advisor, or The Trusted Advisor. I'll have a link in the description, but as a consultant, like those soft skills really matter. And you're probably going to have some of those hard discussions. You're going to have points where you need to, well, I mean, all of what you're doing is advising people. You are stepping into a role of being a trusted advisor. And it was just, as a book, it covers a lot of different things. Some of it's going to be relevant, some not quite so much. But it covers a lot of those kind of tips for dealing with some of those hard situations and just those softer skills. So I just want to, kind of shout out that book because it has actually been quite useful for me. And just dealing with some of those, hard clients, things like that.
Okay. Droogie, did you have any last minute thoughts there?
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys for having me. I hope the discussion was helpful to somebody out there. I know that not everything we said is something that someone wants to hear when they're trying to, break into the security industry, where instead they're more asking what cert to get. But hopefully this is, sobering and helpful information that will help you with your goals.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, and we will see you guys in the next discussion video, and we'll see you guys then.